The first time my father called me useless, I was 11 years old, standing barefoot in the kitchen with a cracked plate in my hand. I still remember the sound before I remember the word. Not the plate breaking, his chair scraping against the floor. That violent wooden drag. A sound that meant something inside the room had shifted, and everyone needed to become smaller. My mother stopped washing vegetables. My sister stopped chewing. Even the ceiling fan felt slower after that sound, its blades turning through thick heat with a low clicking rhythm that suddenly seemed too loud. Click, click, click. I remember staring at the broken porcelain near my feet. One half had landed upside down. The other piece still had blue flowers painted on it. Tiny white cracks spread through the petals like veins under skin. My father looked at me for a long time before speaking. Not angry at first. Worse than angry. Disappointed. Like I had confirmed something he already believed. You can't even hold a plate properly. His voice was calm. Flat. Heavy. I remember my throat tightening because calm meant the anger was still coming. I bent down immediately. I'm sorry, the floor was cold against my knees. I reached for the shards too quickly and sliced my finger open. A bright line of blood appeared almost lazily across my skin. My father laughed once through his nose. Not amusement. Recognition. There, he said quietly. Look at him. Useless, that word stayed. Not because he screamed it. Because nobody disagreed. My mother kept washing vegetables. My sister kept eating. The ceiling fan kept clicking. And somehow that silence turned the word into something permanent. Useless. Not a moment. Not a mistake, an identity. Over the years, the word changed shape inside me. At 13, it meant staying quiet at dinner because every opinion I offered seemed to irritate somebody. At 16, it meant watching my younger brother Ethan become the center of every room without even trying. At 20, it meant coming home from college after dropping out and seeing my father's face harden before I'd even spoken. But by 35, the word had become structural. Like a wall inside my mind, a law. Something I obeyed automatically. I moved carefully around people, apologized before inconveniencing anyone, laughed softly when insulted, accepted things before I even decided whether they hurt. The terrifying part was how natural it all felt. Like gravity, like weather, like I had been trained so slowly and thoroughly that resistance no longer occurred to me. And families are experts at this. Not through grand cruelty, through repetition, tiny humiliations, tiny exclusions, tiny corrections, the same emotional pressure applied over decades until your own mind starts speaking in their voice. By the time the approval papers appeared in front of me, I already hated myself enough to sign almost anything. That was the problem. Not that they needed me, that they knew exactly what version of me would say yes. The house smelled like garlic and old cooking oil when I walked in that evening. My mother never opened windows fully. She said outside air carried dust. So the house held onto everything: heat, smells, conversations, resentment. Nothing ever really left. I closed the front door quietly behind me. The lock clicked. From the living room, the television muttered low political arguments to nobody listening. My father sat in his usual chair wearing the same gray undershirt he wore almost every evening, one hand resting on the armrest, fingers twitching occasionally as if still arguing with invisible people from work. Ethan sat across from him, scrolling through his phone. Neither looked up immediately. That familiar sensation spread through my chest the second I entered. Not fear exactly. Compression. Like my lungs instinctively reduced themselves in this house. You're late, my father said. I checked the clock automatically, even though I already knew the time. 6:17 p.m. Dinner was usually at 6. Traffic had been bad. I opened my mouth to explain, then stopped. Explanations often made things worse here. Sorry, my father made a small sound in his throat. Not acceptance. Dismissal. Ethan glanced at me briefly before returning to his phone. Mom's pissed, he said casually. Of course she was. I loosened my tie slowly, careful not to make noise. The air conditioner rattled overhead but barely cooled anything. Sweat clung to my back beneath my office shirt. I stepped into the kitchen. My mother stood at the counter cutting green onions with sharp, efficient movement. Taboo. 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 She didn't look at me. You couldn't answer your phone. I was driving. You could have called. I know. The knife stopped moving. That was somehow worse than if she'd kept cutting. She turned toward me slowly. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just tired. And disappointment from tired people always cuts deeper because it feels earned. We wait for you every night, she said. Your father works hard. Ethan works hard. But you. She paused slightly. You still act like a child. There it was again. That old invisible courtroom. Every conversation already decided before it began. I wanted to say I worked too. That I hadn't missed dinner in months. That I paid half her medical bills last year without mentioning it once. Instead, I heard myself say, I know, because resistance required energy. And around my family, I always felt tired before the conversation even started. My mother resumed cutting onion. You'll wash dishes tonight, okay, properly this time. Something tightened in my jaw. Tiny, almost nothing, but I felt it. A microscopic pulse of anger. Because I always washed them properly. Because she still checked afterward. Because she still spoke to me like I was 16. Because part of me knew this wasn't about dishes at all. It was about position, roles, keeping everybody emotionally arranged where they belong. And mine had always been beneath everyone else. I stood there too long without speaking. My mother noted. You heard me, yes, then answer faster. I nodded immediately. The pressure eased. Not gone. Never gone. Just redistributed. That's how these homes work. Tension moves like water. It never disappears. It just searches for the weakest place to settle. Dinner passed beneath the usual choreography of humiliation, disguised as normal conversation. My father complained about work. Ethan complained about clients. My mother complained about grocery prices. And me. I existed mainly as a listening surface. Occasionally somebody threw a remark toward me like scrap. You still at that company, my father chewing rice. Yes, they still haven't promoted you. No, a slow nod. As if this confirmed something measurable. Ethan smirked without looking up from his phone. You've been there, what, 8 years? 9, he repeated softly. Jesus, I kept eating. The rice felt dry in my mouth. My father wiped his lips with a napkin. You stay too comfortable. That's your problem. I stared at my bowl. Maybe he was right. That was the terrifying thing. After years of criticism, every accusation starts sounding partially true. You never push yourself, he continued. No ambition, my mother sighed quietly in agreement. Ethan finally looked at me directly. You know what your issue is? I hated when he said that. Because Ethan always spoke like someone diagnosing a defect in machinery. Not cruel. Clinical. You think surviving is enough. Nobody defended me. Nobody ever did. Television continued muttering in the other room. Some politician arguing about national decline. The ceiling fan clicked overhead. Click, click, click. And suddenly I had the strange dissociative feeling I sometimes got during family dinners, that I was watching my own life from slightly outside my body. Watching this exhausted 35-year-old man sitting silently while everyone around him explained why he was fundamentally inadequate. Watching him accept it. Watching him nod occasionally like an employee during a performance review. My father leaned back in his chair. Did you bring the documents? The question landed strangely. I looked up. What documents? The approval forms, I blinked. Ethan and my mother exchanged a quick glance. Tiny, vast, but enough. Something shifted inside me immediately. A small internal movement, like a floorboard bending under weight. What approval forms? Nobody answered right away. My father drank water first, too casually, too slowly. My mother adjusted her chopstick. Ethan scratched his eyebrow. That silence triggered something instinctive in me. The body knows before the mind does. Something was wrong. We didn't want to discuss it before dinner, my mother said carefully. The pressure in my chest deepened. What is it? Ethan finally slid a folder across the table toward me. Blue. Legal document. I stared at it without touching it. My father's expression became strangely neutral. Performative neutrality. Kind people wear when pretending something is ordinary. We're restructuring ownership. Ownership of what? The house, Ethan said. My fingers went cold. Not visibly. Internally. Like blood had quietly retreated from my hand. What? It's temporary, my mother said quickly. Too quickly. Always a bad sign. My father folded his arms. We need your approval signature. There was a buzzing sound suddenly inside my ear. Soft at first, then louder. I stared at the folder. Didn't open it. Didn't touch it. The room felt warmer now. Smaller. The ceiling lower somehow. I don't understand, Ethan leaned forward. Patient. Controlled. Like someone explaining simple math to a child. Because your name is still partially attached to the property, still attached. The phrase hit me strangely. Not because it was inaccurate, because of the way he said it. As if my involvement were accidental, minor, temporary. Even though my thoughts stopped abruptly, something moved inside my stomach, a memory. Sharp. My father speaking 15 years ago. You're the oldest. Family responsibility matters, me taking the loan. Me signing papers. Me sacrificing the apartment I wanted because the bank approved my credit first. My salary. My debt. My years. And now Ethan said still attached, like I was leftover administrative clutter. I finally opened the folder. Paper smell. Fresh ink. Legal language. Transfer authorization. Equity reassignment. My eyes moved across the lines slowly. Then stopped. Then reread them. Again. Again. The numbers felt unreal at first. Then insulting. Then nauseating. You're transferring ownership entirely to Ethan. Nobody answered immediately. Which was answer enough. I looked up slowly. My father's face hardened. That familiar expression. The one that meant resistance itself was becoming offensive. He's married, my father said. He's building a future. I stared at him. And I'm not. The room went very still. That question had escaped before I could stop it. My mother looked uncomfortable instantly. Ethan leaned back. My father's eyes narrowed slightly. Not rage. Worth. Correction. Like I had spoken outside my assigned character. You, he repeated. Quietly. God, that tone. I knew that tone since childhood. The tone used before dismantling somebody. What future? He asked. My throat tightened. I looked back at the document. My name. Tiny on the page. Reduced to signature lines. Legal permission. Consent. That was all they needed from me now. Not respect. Not gratitude. Approval. And suddenly every dinner. Every insult. Every reminder of my failures. Every careful erosion of my confidence, they rearranged themselves into a pattern. A strategy. Not necessarily conscious. That was the worst part. Families rarely plan these things openly. They condition. Over years. Until your compliance becomes automatic. My heartbeat grew heavier. I became aware of my breathing. Too shallow. My father pointed at the papers. This is practical, I looked at him. Practical for who? For the family. The family. Interesting word. Flexible word. Usually meant Ethan. Sometimes my parent. Never me. Ethan spoke carefully. We're not taking anything from you, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because something inside me was beginning to crack, and laughter sometimes leaks out before breakdown. You already did, silent. Television in the other room erupted briefly with applause from some audience, before becoming muffled again. My mother's face tightened. Don't start drama. That word families use when truth becomes inconvenient. I looked at the papers again, and something deeply disturbing happened. Part of me still wanted to sign, even now, even while humiliated, even while realizing exactly what this was. Because approval had become reflexive, because saying no felt physically dangerous, because disappointing them still triggered the same childhood panic buried inside my nervous system. I hated myself for that, more than I hated them. That was the truly rotten part. Not the manipulation, the conditioning. The way they had shaped me into someone who helped destroy himself just to maintain emotional equilibrium in the room. My father noticed my hesitation. You're making this harder than it needs to be. The buzzing in my ears intensified. I looked at Ethan. He wouldn't meet my eyes now. Interesting. Interesting. Because confident people usually maintain eye contact. Avoidance means friction, guilt, or calculation. How long have you been planning this? Ethan rubbed his thumb against the edge of his phone. A while, the words tasted metallic. My mother crossed her arms. You don't even live here anymore. I stared at her. Slowly. I paid for this house. You helped. No, I said quietly. I paid. The room changed instantly. Not visibly. Energetically. Like air pressure dropping before a storm. My father sat forward. Dangerous. Very dangerous. Because my family tolerated weakness. Not contradiction. You think money gives you authority? He asked. Authority. There it was. Not fairness. Not gratitude. Hierarchy. Always hierarchy. I could suddenly see the entire structure with horrifying clarity. My usefulness had always been acceptable. My voice had not. The moment contribution threatened control, it became offensive. My mouth had gone dry. I swallowed carefully. I'm just asking why nobody discussed this with me first. We are discussing it now. No, I said softly. You're presenting it. My father's jaw tightened. My mother looked exhausted already. Ethan exhaled through his nose. And underneath all of it, I felt something deeply unfamiliar beginning to emerge inside me. Not confidence, not anger exactly, awareness, which is sometimes more dangerous. Because once patterns become visible, they become difficult to survive unconsciously anymore. My father tapped the folder. Sign it, simple, direct. The same tone he used when I was 11 holding broken porcelain. The assumption of obedience. And horrifyingly, part of my body still reacted automatically. My hand almost moved. That's what trauma does. People imagine manipulation as dramatic, but real conditioning lives in muscles, breathing, tone recognition, eye contact. The body learns consequences long before the conscious mind catches up. I stared at the signature line. The room felt impossibly quiet now. Even the ceiling fan seemed louder. Click. Click, click. I imagined signing, going home afterward, lying awake in my apartment staring at the ceiling, while something irreversible settled deeper into me. Not just loss, confirmation, proof that they were right about me, that I existed mainly to surrender. My chest tightened harder. Suddenly breathing felt manual. The edges of the room blurred slightly. Not enough for panic, enough for dissociation. My mother noticed. You're overreacting. That phrase almost broke me. Because overreacting is what manipulative families call visible pain. I rubbed my thumb against my palm beneath the table, grounding, trying to stay present. My father's patience thinned visibly. We're waiting. I looked at him. Really looked at him. At the permanent disappointment carved into his face. At the way he only seemed emotionally comfortable when somebody beneath him accepted blame. At the strange satisfaction he derived from correction. Then I looked at Ethan. Beautiful house, successful business, confident posture. And still he needed this. Still he needed me diminished before he could feel secure. That realization hurt more than anything else, because it meant the system would never stop feeding on me voluntarily. Not while I continued cooperating. The silence stretched. Nobody moved. The television laughed somewhere far away. And slowly, painfully, I placed the pen back on the table. My father blinked once. What are you doing? My voice came out quieter than I expected. I need time. The reaction was immediate. Not explosive. Controlled. Which was somehow more terrifying. My mother spoke first. For what? To read everything. You already read it. I want to review it properly. My father leaned back slowly. A dangerous calm entered the room. Kind that usually preceded emotional punishment later. What exactly are you suspicious of? The question itself was manipulation. Because suspicion implied irrationality, paranoia, disloyal. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. I'm not suspicious. Then sign. There it was again. Circular pressure. No acceptable exit except obedience. Ethan finally spoke. You're making this emotional. I looked at him, and something inside me shifted permanently. Because he genuinely believed that. He truly did. Years of family dynamics had convinced him that my pain only became real when it inconvenienced others. I suddenly felt unbelievably tired. Not physically, existentially. Like I had been carrying an invisible weight for decades without realizing how heavy it actually was. I said I need time. My father stood up. Slowly. The chair scraped violently against the floor. And instantly, I was 11 years old again. Barefoot, bleeding finger, broken plate, useless. My entire nervous system reacted before thought arrived. Heart accelerating, shoulders tightening, stomach collapsing inward. It happened automatically. That's the horror of family conditioning. You become multiple ages simultaneously. My father stared down at me. You think you have leverage now? I couldn't answer immediately, because part of me still believed I didn't deserve to. His voice low. Everything you have came from this family. No, that wasn't true. But hearing it spoken aloud destabilized me anyway. Because repeated narratives become psychologically adhesive, even when objectively false. My mother avoided looking at either of us now. Ethan rubbed his forehead impatiently. And suddenly I understood something awful. They had already emotionally completed this transaction before speaking to me. In their minds, my approval wasn't a question. It was paperwork, procedure, a formality attached to a person they no longer fully considered autonomous. That realization hollowed something inside me. My father extended the folder slightly toward me again. One signature. My hands trembled faintly beneath the table. I hid them immediately. Not from them, from myself. Because visible fear would collapse the fragile thing trying to form inside me. I'm not signing tonight. Silent, heavy, immediate. My father stared at me so long the air itself seemed strained. Then he laughed softly. Once. No humor in it. Just disbelief. You, he murmured. The same way someone might react to furniture speaking. You're refusing. The word refusing felt dangerous in this house. Almost obscene. I swallowed carefully. I said not tonight. My father's eyes hardened completely. And for the first time in my life, I saw something beneath his disappointment. Not strength, fear, tiny, buried deep, but there. Because control systems panic when obedience becomes uncertain. And suddenly the room no longer felt stable. Not because I had power, because I had interrupted expectation, which is enough to make families dangerous. The ceiling fan clicked overhead. Click, click, click. And nobody spoke. Nobody spoke for so long that the silence became architectural. Not absent. Structure. Something hanging above the table with weight and shape. My father remained standing. My mother sat perfectly still with her hands folded too tightly together. Ethan leaned back in his chair, but I could see it now, the stiffness in his jaw, the slight bouncing movement in his knee beneath the table. Tiny fractures in composure. For years I had mistaken confidence for stability. But confidence built on control is fragile. The moment control slips, the performance begins leaking at the edges. Television continued murmuring in the living room. Some commercial now. Artificial laughter. Happy voices. The sound felt grotesque inside this room. I became intensely aware of my own breathing. Too loud. Too uneven. I tried slowing it down. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. But that only made me more aware of it. My father finally spoke. Very softly. After everything we've done for you, there it was. Not anger first. The emotional currency my family used more effectively than money. Every kindness transformed retroactively into leverage. Every sacrifice turned into obligation. The problem was that part of me still reacted to it. Instantly. A wave of guilt rolled through my chest so hard it almost made me reach for the pen again. That was the terrifying thing about psychological conditioning. It survives logic. Even while recognizing manipulation, your body still obeys it emotionally. I'm not saying no, I heard myself say quickly. Too quickly. I hated that tone immediately. The appeasing tone. The please don't hate me tone. My father noticed too. Of course he did. Predators recognize weakness the way musicians recognize rhythm. Then why are we still talking? Because I'm scared. Because something feels wrong. Because I think you've been reducing me slowly for years, and I'm only just realizing it. Because I don't know who I am without your disappointment shaping me. But none of those words came out. Instead, I just need time. Ethan laughed quietly through his nose. I looked at him. He shrugged slightly. What exactly are you imagining here? He asked. That we're trying to screw you over. The immediate instinct to retreat surged through me. To soften everything. To say no, no, of course not. To restore equilibrium. But another feeling had begun growing beneath the fear now. Not strength, clarity. And clarity is painful. Because once you see the pattern, every old memory rearranges itself around it. Every insult, every dismissal, every conversation where your confidence somehow left smaller than when it entered. I looked directly at Ethan. You already did. His expression shifted almost invisibly. Not guilt, offense. Because people who benefit from family systems rarely perceive themselves as cruel. Only reasonable. You're being dramatic, again that word. Dramatic, emotional, sensitive. The holy trinity of dismissive families. Language designed not to address pain, but to invalidate its existence. My father sat down slowly again. Worse. Standing anger felt simpler. Sitting meant strategy. He folded his hands carefully. You know what your problem is? My stomach tightened immediately. I hated that sentence. Not because of the insult. Because of the anticipation. Years of conditioning had trained me to experience criticism before it even arrived. You always think feelings matter more than reality. I stared at him. Reality. Interesting word coming from a man who had spent 30 years redefining mine. You live alone, he continued. No wife, no children. No real future plans. This house matters more for Ethan now. Each sentence landed with surgical precision. Not random cruelty. Targeted identity erosion. And the horrifying part was how effective it still was. Because my mind instantly began helping him. He's right. You are alone. You wasted years. What exactly are you protecting anyway? The voice sounded like mine now. That's how these systems survive. Eventually, the abuser no longer needs to speak continuously. You internalize the machinery. My mother finally looked at me directly. You should want to help your brother, as if refusal itself proved moral failure. I rubbed my palms against my pants beneath the table. Sweat, cold. My entire body felt unstable. I realized suddenly that nobody had asked how I felt. Not once. Not even performatively. The conversation had been structured entirely around inconvenience. Their inconvenience. My hesitation. My resistance. Their frustration. I wasn't a person in this room. I was an obstacle. And the second I recognized that fully, something cold moved through me. A grief so deep it almost felt physical. I looked around the kitchen. The old yellow light. The stains near the stove. The hairline crack running across the ceiling. This house had shaped me. Every corner carried some earlier version of humiliation. Every room contained echoes. My father criticizing my grades. My mother comparing me to Ethan. The sound of doors closing. The sound of silence after failed conversation. And suddenly I had the horrifying realization that I had never actually felt safe here. Not once. Not even as a child. Only careful. Carefulness mistaken for peace. My father tapped the folder again. Impatient now. We're wasting time. I looked at the papers. Then at him. Then at my mother. Then Ethan. My family. The people whose approval had governed my nervous system for decades. And I realized something devastating. They truly did not understand why this hurt me. Not fully. Because understanding would require acknowledging me as emotionally equal. They had never done that. Not really. I existed in relation to them as helper. Disappointment. Backup plan. Financial utility. Emotional scapegoat. But not fully human in the same emotional dimension they granted themselves. The awareness made my chest ache. Not metaphorically. Literally ache. A deep pressure beneath the sternum. I stood up slowly. Immediately all eyes followed me. Not concern, alertness, control reacting to unpredictability. I'm leaving, my mother frowned. Don't do this, do what? Have boundaries. Exist independently. My father's voice sharpened. Sit down, and there it was again. That automatic childhood terror. My body reacted before thought. A flash of adrenaline. Heat in my neck. Instant submission impulse. For one horrifying second, I almost obeyed automatically. 35 years old. And still one command could reduce me internally to a frightened child. The realization sickened me. I remained standing. Barely. My father noticed the hesitation. Of course he did. He always noticed weakness fastest. You're embarrassing yourself. The sentence entered me like poison because embarrassment had always been my deepest fear. Not pain. Exposure. Humiliation. Being seen as ridiculous. My family had cultivated that fear carefully over years. Every disagreement reframed as overreaction. Every emotion reframed as instability. Until self-expression itself became dangerous. Ethan stood too now. Can you relax for 5 seconds? Relax. God. The language people use while cornering you emotionally. I grabbed my jacket from the chair. My fingers felt numb. My mother's face hardened suddenly, a shift. Subtle but immediate. The maternal disappointment giving way to irritation. You know, she said quietly, this is why nobody can depend on you. That one landed hardest. Because dependency had been my entire role for years. I paid bills, drove them to appointments, fixed problems, answered late-night calls, sacrificed constantly. But dependency inside dysfunctional families has a specific meaning. Obedience. Anything else becomes betrayal. I looked at her for a long time, and for the first time in my life, I saw exhaustion underneath her manipulation. Not innocent, not victimhood, just somebody who had spent so long preserving family structure that she no longer distinguished love from control. That realization should have softened me. Instead, it made everything sadder, because it meant none of this would ever change voluntarily. The system protected itself too efficiently. My father's voice turned cold. If you walk out now, don't expect us to beg you. I nodded once. Not because I agreed. Because I suddenly couldn't trust my voice. The room felt unreal now. Edges too sharp. Sounds too distant. My own heartbeat strangely loud. I moved toward the door. Slowly. Waiting unconsciously for someone to stop me differently. To ask me to stay. To ask what was wrong. To choose me over the papers. Nobody did. Behind me, Ethan muttered. Unbelievable, the word followed me through the hallway. I put my shoes on with trembling hands. The front door lock clicked loudly when I opened it. For 1 second I stood there frozen. Because leaving felt bigger than living. It felt like stepping outside an identity I had worn my entire life. And identities, even painful ones, feel safer than uncertainty. My father spoke one last time from the kitchen. If you leave like this, don't come back complaining later. Still punishment. Still hierarchy. Even now. I stepped outside. The night air hit my face. Warm. Humid. The streetlights painted everything amber. For a moment I just stood there breathing. My chest hurt. Actually hurt. I realized I was shaking. Not dramatically. Tiny tremors beneath the skin. My nervous system crashing after sustained pressure. The front door closed behind me. Not slammed. Just closed. Which somehow hurt more. I walked toward my car mechanically. The neighborhood was quiet except for distant traffic and barking dogs somewhere far away. My hands wouldn't stop trembling when I unlocked the door. I sat inside without starting the engine. Darkness. The smell of old fabric and dust. My reflection faint in the windshield. And suddenly, everything collapsed inward. Not crying at first. Worse. Disorientation. I stared at my own face and genuinely did not know what was real anymore. Were they right about me? Had I overreacted? Was I selfish? Ungrateful? Wait. Terrifying thing about long-term psychological erosion is that certainty becomes impossible. You lose trust in your own emotional measurement. Pain feels suspicious. Instinct feels unreliable. I leaned forward slowly until my forehead touched the steering wheel. The leather felt warm from the heat, and beneath all the confusion, one thought kept surfacing repeatedly like something drowning. They never loved me without condition. I tried rejecting the thought immediately. Too painful, too absolute. But memory after memory kept rising. Every compliment attached to usefulness, every affection tied to compliance, every moment of warmth disappearing the second I resisted something. I squeezed my eyes shut hard enough to hurt. My father teaching Ethan to drive while I watched from the porch because you're too nervous. My mother reading Ethan's school essays aloud proudly while mine disappeared into drawers unread. Family photos where I looked oddly temporary even while standing in them. And worse than the memories, was realizing how hard I had worked not to notice. Because children protect their families psychologically even at the cost of themselves. It's survival. If the people raising you feel unsafe, the mind often chooses a different explanation. Something must be wrong with me. That belief hurts less initially, but over decades it becomes identity. My phone vibrated suddenly in my pocket. I flinched violently. Actual fear. I stared at the screen. I almost ignored it, then answered. Yeah, silence for a second. Then, you done. Like this was a tantrum. I stared through the windshield at the empty street. What, are you done being weird? My throat tightened so hard it hurt. Even now, even after all this, still no acknowledgement of pain. Only inconvenient. I said I need time, you're blowing this up. I paid for that house too. So, the word hit me like cold water, so. That was it. That was the truth underneath everything. My sacrifices only mattered while they remained silent. Once spoken aloud, they became socially offensive. I heard Ethan exhale impatiently. You don't even want the house, that's not the point. Then what is? I opened my mouth. Closed it again. Because suddenly I realized something horrifying. I genuinely did not know how to explain my own worth to people who had spent decades reducing it. Language failed me. Everything sounded childish or emotional or irrational the second I tried expressing it. That's another consequence of prolonged psychological domination. You lose fluency in your own defense. Ethan's voice softened slightly. Manufactured calm. You're making Dad angry there. The real mess. Not concern for me. Pressure restoration. Family equilibrium. I leaned back slowly against the seat. Something inside me felt extremely fragile now. Like cracked glass under pressure. When was the last time, I asked quietly, any of you cared how I felt? Silent. Not long. But long enough. Then Ethan laughed once awkwardly. Jesus Christ, no answer. Because the question itself violated the family system. Emotional needs flowed upward in this family hierarchy, not downward toward me. I can't do this right now, I whispered. You're acting unstable. There it was. The final weapon. Not disagreement. Discrediting perception itself. I ended the call. Immediately guilt surged through me. Immediate. Violent. I stared at the phone, breathing hard. Why did hanging up feel like a crime? Why did boundaries feel morally wrong? Because somewhere deep inside, I still believed my primary responsibility was maintaining their emotional comfort, even at the cost of my own reality. I sat there for a very long time, not moving. The windshield slowly fogged from my breathing. Cars occasionally passed at the far end of the street. My thoughts looped endlessly. Maybe I should sign. Maybe this is pointless. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm selfish. Then another voice. Why do you always disappear inside their needs? Back and forth. No stable ground. At some point I realized I was crying silently. Not dramatic sobbing. Just tears sliding down my face without expression. Exhaustion leaving the body slowly. I wiped them away angrily. Then more came. Because grief held down for decades doesn't emerge cleanly. It distorts, turns into shame halfway through expression. My phone vibrated again. This time my mother. I stared at it until it stopped. Then another message appeared. Your father is very hurt. Not to. Are you okay? Not to. Can we talk? Your father is very hurt. The sentence was so perfectly familiar, it almost made me laugh. Even now, my emotional function remained caretaker. Pain moved upward. Responsibility moved downward. I locked the phone. My breathing had steadied slightly now, but the quiet inside the car felt dangerous. Too much room for thought. And thoughts were becoming unstable. Because once identity fractures begin, the mind starts revisiting everything. Every memory becomes evident. Every interaction gets reinterpreted. I suddenly remembered being 22 and handing my father my first major paycheck contribution for the house. The pride I felt. God, the pride. Like I had finally earned belonging. And now, sitting alone in my car at 35, I understood the devastating truth. I had spent most of my life trying to purchase love from people who only rewarded usefulness. The realization hollowed me out completely. I started the engine. The vibration beneath my hands felt strangely grounding. Real, mechanical, simple, unlike people. I drove slowly through the sleeping neighborhood. Streetlights slid across the windshield rhythmically. Gold, darkness, gold, darkness. My apartment was only 20 minutes away, but the entire drive felt unreal. At red lights, I kept drifting mentally. Seeing my father standing over me in the kitchen when I was 11. Seeing Ethan's expression at dinner. Hearing my mother say nobody could depend on me. Over and over. By the time I reached my apartment building, my chest felt numb. Not calm. Past calm. I climbed the stairs slowly. Unlocked the door. Entered darkness. Silence immediately swallowed me. My apartment smelled faintly like laundry detergent and old book. Nobody waiting. Nobody criticizing. Nobody needing anything. And somehow that silence felt unbearable, because people raised in emotional chaos often mistake tension for connection. Without pressure, the nervous system becomes disoriented. I stood in the middle of the living room without turning on light. The city glowed faintly through the curtains. My reflection hovered darkly in the window glass. I looked tired, older than 35. I loosened my tie slowly, then stopped halfway, because suddenly I couldn't remember the last time I had asked myself a real question. Not the, what do they need? Not the, how do I avoid conflict? Not the, how do I fix this? Just, what do I want? The silence after that question felt enormous, then terrifying, because there was no answer, only emptiness. A lifetime of adapting to other people had left me frighteningly undefined underneath. I sat on the edge of the couch. The apartment hummed softly around me, the refrigerator motor, distant plumbing sounds in the walls, faint traffic below. And somewhere beneath all the exhaustion, all the grief, all the confusion, something irreversible had shifted. Not healing. Nothing so clean. More dangerous than healing. Awareness. I could still hear my father's voice inside my head. Still feel the instinct to apologize. Still feel guilt crawling through me like infection. But now another realization existed beside it. The version of me they loved most was the version easiest to erase. And once you understand that, truly understand it, you can never return to unconsciousness again. Even if you want to. Especially if you want to. I sat there in the dark for hours listening to the sound of my own breathing, like it belonged to somebody else. And for the first time in my life, I understood that losing your family doesn't always happen when people leave. Sometimes it happens slowly. The moment you finally begin to see them clearly.